Alright, so between seasons of Council of Geeks, you're gonna get me. Just me. And I figure I might as well launch directly into something that is probably gonna get me flamed, or it would if anybody was actually watching. How Final Fantasy VII ruined the Final Fantasy game series. There's something I want to make really clear here. I am not saying that Final Fantasy VII is a bad game. I'm talking about its impact on the overall franchise. Let's back up a little bit to the days before number 7. Final Fantasy 1 through 6, the overall look stayed pretty much the same. Small band of heroes saves the world, basic sort of outline. And of course there's the more superficial things that kept recurring, Moogles, Chocobos, certain summoned characters, etc, etc, etc. And then Final Fantasy VII happened. In many ways still very much fits the Final Fantasy mold. It's got a similar basic plot structure. The music was still by Nobuo Uematsu, and there were the Chocobos, the summoned beasts, the usual array of spells like fire, ice, bolt. That was all there, but there were a lot of big changes. Firstly, to the aesthetic. In the leap from traditional sprites to polygons, something got lost. Something specific, the design work of Yoshitaka Amano. The reason to have someone like Yoshitaka Amano design your characters and your creatures back in the days of sprites was because you can't make it look realistic, so you need to give it an artistic flourish. As graphics got into 3D and then got better, that got lost in favor of a general sense of realism. So talking aesthetics is all well and good, but let's talk about the materia magic system. It was really clever, and it was a pretty dramatic shift in how magic was handled. The way it was handled in 1 through 6, it was all basically handled the same way. 7 changed all that, and to rave reviews. Fans loved it, critics loved it, and Square took the wrong lesson away from this. We now have a completely redesigned magic and/or combat system with every single entry. They hit it out of the park once, but boy, there is no reason for them to be so drastically redesigning it. And it's gotten to the point where with Final Fantasy XIII, what they ended up with was a really good combat system and lousy characters and story. They actually forgot that some people want to care about these characters. Which brings us to how Final Fantasy VII screwed up the way these stories get told. 7 brought in this aspect of mystery, of twists, of really convoluted stuff, to the point that at this moment in time, I don't think I could really properly articulate exactly what the deal is with Cloud and Sephiroth. It was complicated. It was overly complicated. Especially in that story, because the moments that everyone remembers, like when Aerith is killed, it has nothing to do with the ridiculous twists, and Cloud isn't really what he said he was. He's actually this guy, and there was this Zack guy, and who the heck even cares? Nobody cares. And we started getting some really convoluted stories. I think Final Fantasy VIII is probably going to rank at the top of that particular bit, because it's just, what is going on in that game? These characters, and they know each other, and they grew up together, but they don't remember, and there's this witch who's not really a witch, but there is a witch, there's this other witch. Strong setup, confused execution. Kind of became the standard for a lot of the entries that came in after that. Wait a minute, what about Final Fantasy IX? That kind of went back to a lot of what the older series had done. Doesn't that throw a wrench in your theory? Nope, it doesn't. And here's why. Final Fantasy IX was an overcorrection. Final Fantasy VIII definitely had its critics, and rightfully so. There was very little distinction between the characters, either in terms of personality, appearance, or the way that they played in combat. The way that magic was handled was kind of stupid. You had the summons, which lasted forever, Actually, we're going to take a little side trip on that issue right now. That was another thing that Final Fantasy VII ruined. Because they got a little bit carried away with their new graphic capabilities, they got bigger, they got more elaborate, and it just kind of snowballed from there. And it made Square decide that they were an indelible part of the series, and we must have them, even if they don't fit, which got us to the point where Final Fantasy XIII... Shiva is a motorcycle. What the hell? Okay, coming back from that tangent. So, Final Fantasy IX was aggressively nostalgic. Fans didn't really respond to it. And because they swung the pendulum too far away from the good innovations and the correct lessons they should have learned from 7 and 8, it just felt not like, ooh, old school fun, more like, well, we were progressing and now we've stepped back. And so they just dropped it. And that brings us to where we are with the repeated redesign, the loss of aesthetic. Started with Final Fantasy VII, got cemented with the good not great reaction to Final Fantasy IX. And there you have it. And we're here because of Final Fantasy VII and a developer that took away the wrong lessons from a massively successful and very good game. This Council of Geeks is adjourned.